Welcome, everyone. We're just getting ready to get this show started this evening. It'll be a few more minutes, but thank you. You are here tonight attending the City of Pasco's Broadmoor Interchange Project Open House number 2. We'll get started in about a minute or so. Just FYI, this meeting is being recorded tonight, so if you came in or have to leave early, or you have other friends that weren't able to make it, no problem. They will be able to access this from the project website. So we'll give it just a few more minutes here. Or minute. Okay, just about there. I see. Wow, 42 folks. This is great. We're really excited that all of you could make time to be with us tonight because we know everybody's got busy schedules and busy lives. So we really appreciate your time. This is a project that I think is of interest to the entire community. So good evening, everyone. My name is Kendall Flint. I'm a consultant with DKS Associates, and we are working with the City of Pasco on this particular project. Tonight's workshop is going to be obviously in English, but it is also available in Spanish. And I'm going to invite my colleague, to Elizabeth Aguilar to welcome anyone here that may need Spanish language instruction tonight. So Elizabeth, I will hand it over to you.
Hola, buenas noches y bienvenidos al taller virtual del proyecto de intercambio de Broadmoor. Yo me llamo Elizabeth y les agradecemos por tomarse el tiempo de participar en este evento. Para aquellos que necesiten interpretación en español, está disponible y será proporcionado por mí. Si desea participar en español, seleccione en la zona de abajo la opción para el idioma español. También puede levantar su mano o indicar a través de la ventana del chat que requiere el español. Nos iremos al audio español desde ahora y gracias.
Well, at this point, it doesn't look like we have any hands raised, but if it does come up later, we will mention this as we go forward. So if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide for me, that would be great. So what we're going to be doing tonight is going through a presentation about the different alternatives that might be considered as part of this project. And so Aaron and the project team are going to be walking you through what those components are. And after we've had an opportunity to look at all of those, we'll then take public comment on each one. You'll also learn later tonight that there's an opportunity to participate in an online survey. And my colleague, Veronica, will be posting that not only on the website, but also in our chat. So you can go there and share additional comments or concerns or questions you might have. When we reach the Q&A portion, because we're in a webinar, the way this will work is that you'll basically click, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you'll see a thing that says raise hand. You'll raise your hand and then I will call on you, give you an opportunity to make your comment or ask your question, and then we'll move on to the next. We're very excited that we have so many people with us tonight, and we'll try to get to as many of you as we possibly can. If someone is saying something that you agree with, then hopefully you can just sort of clap along with them. Or again, you can use the survey as we move forward. So we're going to have a strict limit of 3 minutes per comment when that comes up. So I encourage you to be brief, but also we're very interested to hear what you have to say tonight. Next slide, please. There's also, you'll see at the bottom of your screen, an opportunity for Q&A. And so if you have a question or even a comment that you'd like to share with us, you can type that in the box and we will read that aloud during the presentation. We'll hold all of those until we get to the part where we're talking about each of the 5 alternatives. That way we can have the maximum time for people to have their maximum time for comment as we move forward. And again, if there are duplicate questions, we will only ask and answer that once. And then Veronica will be updating the Q&A on the project website to be able to share that information with you later. Next slide, please. So tonight's agenda, basically, we're going to be doing a welcome. I hope you all do feel welcome tonight. Our team will be going over our project background, what we're doing here on this particular interchange, what type of opportunities there have been for public input. We'll be going over the alternatives and schedule. And then, of course, we'll be leaving it open for questions and comments. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Steve to say a few words on behalf of the City of Pasco.
Thank you, Kendall. My name is Steve Worley. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Pasco. And I just want to welcome all of you to our virtual workshop tonight. Thank you for joining us. We're just really excited about this because there are so many participants, and that's exactly what we want on projects like this. Some of you may have attended our previous workshop, and in that one, we had 156 people log in and join us for that workshop. That was fantastic. And tonight we have 125 people registered. So we just really appreciate people taking the time and joining us for this important project. We really, really look forward to continuing our work with you and getting your thoughts and comments. This is the second public meeting, and tonight we're going to review some of the results of the alternatives analysis that was completed by the technical team, based a lot on the comments that were received from all of you at the last meeting. So again, welcome. Thank you for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Aaron, who will lead us through the rest of the presentation. Aaron?
Thank you, Steve. So I'm Aaron Berger, the consultant project manager for this project. So yeah, welcome everybody. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide. So a little bit of a review, just going back to some of the things we talked about last time we all got together. Some background on this project. This is for the Broadmoor Boulevard, also known as Road 100 interchange with I-182. You can see circled on the map on the right. The city of Pasco recently updated their comprehensive plan. This update includes a lot of growth in the Broadmoor area, so near Broadmoor Boulevard, both north and south of I-182. This development is expected to be both residential and commercial, bringing in as many as 7,000 new housing units and 3,000 new jobs in the next 20 years. Next slide, please. So Pasco is currently refining some proposed design improvements to Broadmoor Boulevard, both north and south of the I-182 interchange. This project, the one we're talking about today, is the project that fills in that gap. So you see the two yellow lines on the map to the right. Those are the areas the city is currently refining design for to figure out the solution on the corridor. This project is that gap in the middle, figuring out what to do with the interchange, how to address the existing and the future needs. Next slide, please. So as we talked about last time, there's some really three key categories of concern that we've noticed at this interchange, and this is based both on feedback we've had from the public and from the analysis of our technical team and field observations. First category is in motor vehicle safety. We've seen a history of crashes on I-182 near the eastbound exit ramp to Broadmoor. We've also seen high crash incidents on Broadmoor Boulevard through the interchange. From a traffic congestion standpoint, kind of our second key issue, we've seen problems with queuing on the eastbound off-ramp and also slowing on I-182 approaching the off-ramp. Want to point out right now that while those two issues are related, they also have different causes from time to time. Some of this is just due to so many people trying to exit the freeway. Other parts of these issues are due to problems up at the signal. The other issue we're seeing is bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety throughout the interchange. Right now, there's not much facility for bicycles or pedestrians to get through the interchange. We saw that a lot in the public comments. A lot of people noted that it's really hard to get through this interchange. They won't let their children walk through this interchange. As somebody who's been out there in the field several times now, I can attest it's definitely not a comfortable place to walk through. That's the other really key concern that we're looking at addressing with this project. Next slide, please. So talking about timeline, we talked about this a little bit last time. We had our first workshop back in December. We talked about the project background and purpose and solicited feedback from the public on the concerns and needs you've seen out there. We also got some input from the public on potential alternatives that people thought we should look at. Taking all that information, we've moved into our alternatives development. We did some alternatives development work sessions with our technical advisory team, our TAC, over the towards the end of January into early February. Then moving forward from there, where we got to where we are today, where we have a set of alternatives that we're advancing into analysis. And this is an opportunity to present these alternatives that we're moving forward into evaluation to the public and solicit feedback. Get your thoughts on the direction of these alternatives and the things you like and the things you'd like to see enhanced or changed. Looking further ahead, we're aiming to get our WSDOT and FHWA approval of a preferred alternative later in the spring, along with the environmental approval of a preferred alternative, and then begin the design phase of this work. At that point, we will make the final report available to the public, which will include the details of the preferred alternative that is selected, and then move forward into project bid out, depending on the size of the project. We could potentially go to bid sometime in the late fall. Next slide, please.
Great. So as Aaron had described, back in December, we did our first workshop. And I want to say thank you to all the people that had provided some public input into our social pinpoint site. It was up for 2 months and we received over 80 comments, which is great. There were comments, all variety of areas, bicycle, pedestrian, things they were concerned about, safety or traffic congestion wise. And as you can see that there is a large, like 29% of the comments were safety concerns. And then the 14% were bicycle and pedestrian concerns, which is really great news that we got a lot of information. And we used this information, in fact, to develop some alternatives. So a lot of those comments had included different alternatives that were considered for the analysis and what we should use for brainstorming purposes. And in this case, we were suggested the Diverging Diamond Interchange, the loop ramp, or also known as the cloverleaf. And we were given a lot of great ideas for pedestrian alternatives. And they were also considered in the brainstorming session. We also looked at the extended deceleration lane for eastbound off-ramp as well. And you can see that we provided we looked at a lot of different alternatives and including a lot of different alternatives provided by the public. And we want to say a really great thanks to everyone that provided information and their comments on the social pinpoint site. I'll hand it over back to Aaron.
Thank you, Veronica. So I'm going to go over where we're at in this project process. We kind of already went through this at a high level looking at the schedule, but this is kind of the screening process diagram really shows how we move through this planning process and ultimately get to a preferred solution. So the early stages, when we were brainstorming alternatives, we engaged our advisory group, the technical group with representatives from the city, from WSDOT, FHWA, from the county, the BFT, the transit agency, and the BFCOG, the MPO. Worked with that group to develop and brainstorm alternatives, and we also solicited feedback from you, the public, as Veronica was mentioning. So those alternatives that we got through social pinpoint and through the discussions at the last work session, those were also brought into this brainstorming exercise. So we started with a wide range of alternatives, all kinds of ideas, but generally aimed towards achieving the project purpose and need, addressing those 3 key concerns that we talked about related to safety, motor vehicle congestion, and bicycle and pedestrian connectivity and safety. So our next step was to refine these alternatives. So what we did is we grouped them into what we called families of alternatives. There's a lot of different solutions for an interchange like this, and many of those solutions are complementary, which means you could build both of them and they wouldn't conflict. They both fix different issues. So it's important that we kind of group things together to make sure we're not eliminating or discouraging alternatives that don't compete with each other. We did this alternatives refinement as a technical team, and then we brought this back to our advisory group and we did our first level feasibility screening. And this is where we looked at things like estimated right-of-way impacts to existing structures, impacts to access to the interstate. Interstate access requirements are very strict with FHWA, and we have to meet certain guidelines. So we did this first level feasibility screening, and the outcome of that is the list of alternatives that we're going to go over today. These are the alternatives that pass through this first level of screening. And that's where we are now. We're analyzing these alternatives, doing this kind of second level of evaluation to determine which is our preferred. That's where we are now, and this is your opportunity to again engage in the process as we move forward into the ultimate scoring of alternatives to determine the preferred. And then we get to our preferred alternative, which is really the goal and outcome of this planning process. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, when we did our alternatives refinement coming out of the brainstorming session, we created these alternative families or categories. One set of improvements, first one I'll mention is some improvements to I-182 specific. So two improvements really focused on the freeway itself. Second set of alternatives is alternatives focused at the north intersection, or you can think about that as the westbound ramps intersection. So if you're going westbound on I-182 and you want to get off at Broadmoor, this would be your intersection. And then the south intersection or the eastbound ramps intersection. Then considering full interchange reconstruction, so looking at both those intersections simultaneously, as well as some potential improvements to I-182 at the same time. So this fourth family is really kind of these, we call them comprehensive solutions. And then the fifth one is our bicycle and pedestrian improvements. Next slide, please. We'll start first with our freeway alternatives. And as Veronica mentioned earlier, we'll go through these alternatives. I will present them. I'll give you an overview of the thinking behind these alternatives. And then we will, when we go to our Q&A, we'll go through these again and provide you the opportunity to comment. So focusing first on our freeway alternatives. The one alternative we considered is this eastbound loop ramp. There's a little bit of history for this alternative. Originally, when this interchange was laid out, it was anticipated that this loop ramp would be added at some time in the future when development and traffic volumes justified it. The purpose of this loop ramp would be to split exit ramp volume between two locations. You think about all the traffic using the current eastbound exit ramp from I-182, all that queuing that occurs. And a lot of that traffic is making a left turn, and a lot of that traffic is making a right turn. What this does is all the right turn traffic stays on the ramp that's out there today. The left turn traffic gets on the loop ramp. So it splits that traffic into two different movements. It simplifies the traffic operations at the eastbound ramp terminal, the south intersection, because we lose our eastbound left turn and we replace it with a westbound right turn, which is a much simpler movement to serve from a traffic control perspective. The other alternative we considered was an eastbound dual offering. So taking that ramp that's out there today, creating we call it a deceleration lane. So essentially you'd have a 4-lane section of I-182 approaching the exit, and then you'd have 2 lanes exit to Broadmoor instead of 1. The purpose here is to increase that exit ramp capacity and decrease the slowing on the freeway. Next slide, please. Now looking at the north intersection alternatives. One option we looked at here was widening the off-ramp to include a dual right turn lane. Today it's a single right turn. This would reduce queuing risk caused by future growth. And I want to point out too that this is really not a significant issue today out in the field, but as the comprehensive land use predictions continue to develop into the future, as we see more development occurring in the Broadmoor area, we predict that this movement will become more problematic. Think a little bit about Road 68 right now with the westbound right turn movement at that intersection and how much traffic uses that movement today. As Pasco continues to grow, there will be more demand for that type of movement. Then the other alternative we looked at this location is a roundabout or modifications to the signal. These alternatives would be intended to reduce delays at the intersection and also improve protection for pedestrian crossings. The signal modifications would range from things like having the westbound left turn separated from southbound through movements to reduce delay and conflict, while the roundabout would be really a roundabout configuration at this location. Next slide, please. So at the south intersection, we looked at more alternatives, and part of this is because, well, from our project purpose, we're really trying to fix some of these issues we've seen on this exit ramp, the eastbound exit ramp, and also with us considering a loop ramp as an option, that leads to more alternatives at the ramp terminal because there's different movements, different geometry to deal with if that loop ramp's in place. So one alternative we considered was keeping the existing ramp configuration that's out there today, but putting a roundabout at this off-ramp with the intent to reduce delays at the intersection, improve pedestrian crossing. The other alternatives we considered were a roundabout or a signal with the new loop ramp in place. And this was, again, be intended to reduce delays at the intersection, simplify the traffic operations as we discussed previously, and also provide improved protection for pedestrian crossings at the intersection. Next slide, please. And now the fun one. This is a full interchange reconstruction alternative. Now, it's important to point out here that there's a lot of potential interchange configurations we could consider, and we did at a high level consider lots of different ones, a single point urban interchange or a something with more loop ramps, something with flyovers. But from a feasibility perspective, thinking about the criteria we're working with related to right of way and everything else, and thinking also ahead about what is the best solution long term for this interchange. We settled on this DDI, and there was a lot of there were comments from the public, also from some of the regional stakeholders in the project with interest of looking at a DDI at this location. So that's what this is, and the version that we're looking at is a diverging diamond interchange with roundabouts, which is a little unique from a DDI perspective. DDIs are already a bit of a unique feature, but the overall purpose of a DDI is to gain some operational, traffic congestion relief from removing left turns and simplifying. It doesn't. I know it doesn't look simpler, but from a traffic management perspective and a congestion management perspective, this layout does simplify traffic operations. The reason we were looking at the roundabouts is that it really helps us to reduce traffic speeds, so that it increases the safety for bicycles and pedestrians. Some challenges with this alternative. Any diverging diamond interchange alternative would require us to close the existing loop ramp, as noted in the figure. That it doesn't work with this configuration, so we'd have to close that movement. Would also require us to either widen or build a new bridge structure over 182. And this option only works with a single eastbound off-ramp. It does not work with the loop ramp, the loop ramp we were considering. So I'm going to run you through how this alternative works from a traffic circulation perspective. It's a little confusing looking at it just as a stick figure. So if you're traveling on Broadmoor Boulevard northbound, you can see with the yellow arrows if you want to go on to I-182 eastbound, I-182 westbound, or stay on Broadmoor Boulevard going northbound. And this is the unique feature of DDIs where you drive in we call it the contraflow direction across the freeway. This is, as somebody I've driven through several DDIs and definitely analyzed some in the past, they look a lot more from an aerial view. They look very confusing. When you drive them, especially if you've driven one once or twice, it's actually a lot simpler than you'd think. The main reason is there's usually a physical barrier separating the two directions of traffic between the interchange intersections. So that section where you feel like you're driving on the wrong side of the road, you don't actually see the traffic going the other direction. It feels like you're on your own piece of roadway. So that's an important thing to remember when you're looking at this. So here's northbound. Let's take a look at southbound. You can see same idea circulating through. I've noticed how we've simplified the conflict points, right? There's one major conflict in the roundabout, and everything else is really either a free left or a free right turn. And then looking at the ramp terminals, if you're using I believe it's the eastbound ramp, is how you process through the interchange, and then looking at the westbound ramp. So that's how this configuration would work. Next slide, please. Now moving on to our bicycle and pedestrian alternatives. So we looked at a few different categories of alternatives. Some focused more on crossing the interstate, and others focused more towards the safety at the ramp terminals for bicycles and pedestrians. So if we're looking first at crossings, we ended up with these 5 alternatives that we're currently evaluating. First one is this Midland Lane new bridge, and this is really the idea with this one is trying to take bicycle and pedestrian traffic away from the high volume traffic of the interchange. This alternative would require this new trail along the eastbound on-ramp to I-182. That would take you from Broadmoor Boulevard down to the new overcrossing. This bridge, which would roughly align with Midland Lane, would cross over 182, and then you would tie back into the existing bicycle and pedestrian trail along I-182, and that would complete the crossing. Then we also are considering a new pedestrian and bicycle bridge on the east side of the bridge and on the west side of the bridge, and we're evaluating which one of those from a routing perspective and a traffic safety perspective makes the most sense. We also considered restriping the existing bridge, taking what's out there today, potentially narrowing the lanes on Broadmoor Boulevard to squeeze in more space and some level of protection for bicycles and pedestrians on one side of the existing bridge out there. I will point out now that this alternative we see is a short-term fix. We don't see that solution as part of any long-term solution to this corridor, but we do see that as something that could potentially be done very quickly to fix the existing need, not fix, but improve on what's out there today. And then the last option is basically taking the existing bridge and widening it to accommodate a much more significant bicycle and pedestrian structure. And that would still include physical separation from the traffic lane. So there would be some form of barrier between the path and the cars. Next slide, please. Moving on to the on and off ramps, the exit and entrance ramps from 182. We are looking at potential grade separation at these locations for bicycles and pedestrians. And we were considering both over and under crossings, but ultimately based on the grades, the right of way, and also the ADA slopes required to make these work. So you think about if you're in a wheelchair and you're trying to get to one of these crossings, we need to maintain a traversable grade. People need to be, it can't be too steep. So we had to pick out what was the optimal design. Was it an undercrossing or an overcrossing, depending on what's going on with the topography out there. And ultimately, we found that an overcrossing actually could make more sense in one portion of the interchange near the westbound off-ramp, and that all the other locations undercrossings made more sense. These are the other alternatives we're considering. And I will point out that when we're looking at solutions, these would be coordinated with whatever main bicycle and pedestrian facility we'd select to cross 182. So for example, we wouldn't put in these crossings on the eastbound on-ramp or the westbound off-ramp if we built a new bridge on the west side of Broadmoor Boulevard. That would obviously be all tied together to one system. Next slide, please. And so that wraps up the set of alternatives. I will point out too that, like I said, these have been through the first set of feasibility screening. So we looked at a lot more alternatives. So we had a wide range of considerations, but ultimately focusing on the project purpose and need and looking at solutions that can fix the problems that are out there today and what we foresee or think are likely for the future. This was what we came out with. I'll hand it back to Kendall.
Thanks so much, Aaron. And just so that people understand the context, because I think that's really important. We have 5 alternatives right now. Is it possible to build all 5, or do we need to make choices about which are the ones that are the most viable that people want to support?
That's it. Yeah, that's good comment, Kendall. So to be clear, we have 5 categories of alternatives. We have many more than 5 alternatives. When you add them all up, we're more in the range of 20 alternatives. But many of these alternatives, as you see as we go through, could be built at the same time, or at different times, but they don't conflict with each other. For example, improvements to the north intersection of the interchange versus the south intersection of the interchange. It's important to find alternatives that play well together, but they are very independent of each other. So we have five sets of alternatives, and there are competing alternatives within each of those sets. And then ultimately the DDI alternative is really kind of the one independent that really has to be on its own option. Everything else, there's some amount of interplay between them. A lot of these can work together.
Great. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to go through each one of these. And given we've got about an hour left, there's 5 of them. So we're going to, again, allow some time for each one. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you do want to make a comment on these, you can do that on the Q&A. You can also raise your hand if you look at the bottom. I already see some Q&As coming up, so people were paying attention. Yeah. And what we want to do here, of course, is get to as many as we can. So if you do raise your hand, I will ask you to unmute yourself. We'll be able to hear your comment, and then we'll be able to move that forward. So the 5 categories that we have, again, number 1 was the I-182 improvements. Number 2 is the north intersection improvements. 3 was the south intersection improvements. 4 is a full interchange reconstruction, as Aaron laid it out. And then 5 really looks at the bicycle and pedestrian improvements. I'm going to start out right here. And Aaron, while I'm looking at this, can you see the Q&A on your screen? One of the questions, this from Brian Gibson, is planning for long trucks included, or is Pasco planning to close the Broadmoor interchange to commercial, ag traffic, et cetera, et cetera?
I might actually let Steve take that one, but I would say at this point, we're not looking at vehicle sizes in the designs, but as the project would advance into design, we would include a significant design vehicle.
Steve, you need to unmute. It's the story of the Zoom, right?
Okay. Yeah, you are correct, Aaron. We are planning to accommodate trucks in all of these designs. We recognize that we have a very large agricultural community, especially to the north of us. And so all of the improvements will take into account all of these large trucks. We will not be closing Broadmoor Avenue to those trucks.
Great. While we're taking some other questions before we start, Rebecca, I'm going to ask you to take your question, which you put in the chat, and put it in the Q&A so we can have it on that feed. The chat's really set up there for if you have technical difficulties or whatnot. And the chat is right at the bottom of your screen in between participants, I think. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that'd be great. Ken asks, for the eastbound additional loop option, what would keep drivers entering 182 westbound from accidentally entering the new exit ramp beyond a sign? Scary.
That's a good comment. Good question. We would definitely look into some significant channelization for that movement. You think in some cases, a loop ramp like that, you actually tie in, as we call it, a free movement. So it doesn't even go into a signal. It just kind of sweeps in and becomes an additional lane on the local roadway. In this case, it's probably not going to work because we're pretty constrained by the existing overcrossing structure on Broadmoor. So what we do would be put in some physical separation between that movement and the on-ramp with some curb, and also angle it to make sure that it's really not accessible from the left turn lane on southbound Broadmoor. So we could even put in a curb on southbound Broadmoor that would prevent people from making that turn too soon and getting on the wrong ramp. So there's a lot of more physical treatments we could put in place, but that's moving into more detailed design, and we're not quite at that point yet. So
Okay.
good comment, good thing to know.
So some of these questions are coming up. These will also be coming up later. So I want to go to this first one here and ask folks, let's try to see if we can walk through these 5 and comment on these. And at the end, I'll come back and read the additional comments that came in on the chat. So Freeway Alternatives, number 1, this is the eastbound loop ramp. I see Forrest Gibson has his hand up, so I'm going to allow Forrest to make a comment on this one right now. So Forrest, talking permit, you have to unmute yourself, but you do have the ability to do that.
Can you hear me?
We certainly can, sir. Welcome.
As an addition to this, these number 1, it would be my contention that why haven't we discussed having a second off ramp off of eastbound 182 prior to the current overpass? You could come right off the freeway and line up right on Chapel Hill and that would serve all the people that live south of this intersection when they're coming off the freeway. You know, there's a lot of us that would have to be incorporated into this whole roundabout thing when one more exit off the freeway, line up right to Chapel Hill, and either most of the traffic either goes straight on Chapel Hill eastbound or goes southbound on Road 100.
No, good comment and good question. We're jotting all of these down. Aaron, did you want to respond to that one?
Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah, great comment, Forrest, and that is an alternative we considered in the brainstorming phase, and it didn't make it through our feasibility screening for a variety of reasons. One mainly being access standards for FHWA facilities. That's 2 access points that close together would be difficult to get approved, and by difficult I mean very, very, very challenging. It's unusual for federal highways to approve something like that, especially in this day and age. So there's some issues there. Also with if you're getting closer to the bridge, the 182 bridge, once you put in your ramp and your deceleration lane, and in general, federal highways and WashDOT are not very supportive of an improvement that only addresses part of an access issue, right? So this is only providing really one direction of benefit, and especially as we start looking further into the future, you start to see kind of the reverse of some of these problems in the morning. So there's going to be issues getting on the freeway, and this half ramp would only fix part of the problem. Those were some of the reasons we didn't advance it further. It's also just would be a very expensive project and have some environmental concerns as well. So.
I just want to let everybody know that is putting in questions in the Q&A in the chat. I'm going to get to all of them, but before I do want to go through these 5 alternatives. Does anyone else have any questions or comments specific to alternative number 1? And if so, if you could raise your hand at this time, that would be great. And if not, we'll move on to alternative 2. And then we'll come back and do all the other things. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. Veronica, let's go ahead and go up to, here, I'm sorry, Peter Enda, I'm giving you an opportunity so you can unmute yourself and make your comment.
Hi, this is actually his wife, Vanessa. Sorry. Zoom
No
is
worries.
magic.
We do this all the time. We're sharing the Zoom love.
Yeah, so I had a question if you'd evaluated the length of time it would cost or it would take to do this upgrade as respect to the others. Like you didn't have time on any of these alternatives. Do you have like an idea what the length of construction or something like that would be for something like this as a positive or a negative for the benefit? I was just curious. That's kind of a general question probably for all of them.
Aaron, you want to take that?
It's a really good question. Yeah, I was gonna say that's a really good question. It's something we're definitely considering as we move into the next level of evaluation. Disruption to existing traffic is something that we are concerned about. If we have alternative, and actually one of our screening criteria was specifically that we weren't going to consider alternatives that would require tearing down the existing interchange and replacing it because there's really no other viable alternative while that's happening. And there's just too much traffic using the interchange today to consider that. So that's something we're looking into. The rest of that will really come out in the cost, right? The bigger projects have longer schedules, bigger traffic control impacts, that's all reflected in the cost estimate. So as we push these alternatives through the evaluation, we will be developing cost estimates, and that will have a schedule component to it.
And just so that there's a couple other questions that will be coming up at the end that relate to safety and cost. So we will get to those in just a few minutes. Any other questions specific to alternative number 1, freeway alternatives? I see Spencer's hand up. Okay, Spencer.
With the loop ramp here, I'm anticipating that there would be a lot of northbound left turns into the Broadmoor area. And we already know that there's a lot of northbound right turns to take the loop to go to Richland. So just want to, I don't know that you've done traffic forecasting yet at this stage of your study, but I think that will be an interesting weave to evaluate there to see how those will operate together.
Thank you. Okay, we'll make sure that'll go in the Q&A as well, that we will respond to that. Thank you for that one. Are there any others related to alternative number 1? If not, we'll go ahead and go to alternative 2, if you don't mind forwarding that. Okay, so this is the north intersection alternatives, which involve widening the off-ramp to include dual right turn lanes, reducing queuing, and then also a roundabout. And I think there's going to be a question here just to kind of throw this together from Thomas. It said, why are roundabouts thought to be safer for pedestrians and cyclists? So let's start with that question because it relates, I think, to this, and then we'll ask folks to raise their hands if they've got questions or comments that relate to alternative number 2.
Yeah, well, I think that for roundabouts, there's a lot of research out there, and there's been a lot of studies of before and after. And from a bicyclist or a pedestrian standpoint at a roundabout, the biggest safety benefit is speed change. Roundabouts are intended to slow drivers down because of the way they're managed. The geometry of a roundabout is intended to slow vehicles down. That's why even approaching a roundabout, you'll notice, especially the newer roundabouts, there's typically a little bit of a curve in the road coming in. And that curve is intended to slow you down approaching the roundabout before you ever get there. So you can't just blast straight through at 45 miles an hour. That reduction in speed, you can't eliminate crashes, but if vehicles are going 15 to 20 miles an hour versus 45 miles an hour, those conflicts are more avoidable. It's much easier to hit the brakes at that speed and less severe when they do occur. So that's really the biggest piece of it. But there's also benefits related to shorter crossing distances. As pedestrians at a roundabout, you only have to cross 1 to 2 lanes of traffic at most. At signals, maybe you have the protection of a phase of the signal to cross over, but you've got to cross 5 lanes or more, depending on the location. So that amount of time you're in the roadway is significantly longer. So those, I'd say, are probably the 2 main issues. Steve, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add to that, but I'd say those are the big ones.
Oh, that was a great explanation.
Well done, sir. Well done. All right. Are there any other comments on alternative number 2? And again, those of you that are in the chat, we're going to get to those at the very end. So, and we'll have time, but if there's no other hands raised and it looks like there's not specific to this, let's go to option number 3. This is alternative number 3. This is south intersection alternatives. Again, we're talking about a roundabout, and I think we just kind of addressed some of those things there, and also a roundabout signal with a new loop ramp. So are there any questions or concerns specific to this for number 3, south intersection alternatives? And if so, please raise your hand, or you can also put something in the Q&A or the chat, and we'll be reading those when we get through the 5. And from what I'm seeing as people are typing in, there's kind of like an overall kind of as these all are connected together sort of question. So I think our Q&A at the end is probably going to be the most viable on that. All right, let's go ahead and go to number 4. And this, of course, was the full interchange reconstruction. This is removing all left turns, decreasing speeds, and of course, requiring the closure of the existing loop ramp and a bridge widening with the new bridge structure. It only works with a single eastbound off ramp, so that is a constraint on that, but it is an alternative that is being considered. I just noticed a moment ago, Scott Tomerin, only option 4 really seems to address the multitude of issues here, but is the DDI, and I believe that is a divergent diamond in use anywhere here. Was that a divergent diamond? I think it was. And specifically, is there also one that includes roundabouts? And perhaps you can address that, Aaron.
Yeah, so in terms of DDIs, believe there is one in, okay, this is a little bit of reach, man. I believe in Lacey, Washington. That's but don't quote me on that. I know there is one in the state, not with roundabouts though, just with signals. And I know that there's a few down here in Oregon. I'm actually in our DKS Portland office. We've got one down in Southern Oregon as well. And there, different states in the country have a lot of these. In terms of DDIs with roundabouts, there's been, I think, a few, one in Missouri, and then another one that's half signal, half roundabout. So one side is a signal, the other side is a roundabout. So these have begun. And I do want to point out that while this alternative we're looking at has roundabouts, if this were to ultimately become the preferred alternative, we would do more evaluation to determine if a signal versus a roundabout makes the most sense at the ramp terminals. And we'd look at those individually. We'd say the north intersection and the south intersection, roundabout here or signal here. So we do more analysis on that. So yeah, there's some of these. I've driven through some in Texas as well. They're definitely being built and becoming more popular over time, especially as people get more used to driving.
It's interesting because
that covers the whole question, Kendall, or was there a part 2?
No, there's quite a lot of things. A lot of people are asking about it. It's the diverging diamond is sort of like the new thing, right? And in California, as an example, they were like, no. And now all of a sudden they're considering it. And what we're finding is that on a national basis, these are starting to pop up, and they can be really efficient in terms of moving vehicles through with a lower crash rate and other pieces. Veronica, it would not be a bad idea to put some additional information on the website so folks can see some of the other areas that they have been used in. It's definitely something new, but it isn't necessarily something that is so new that it hasn't been tested out. It actually has been used, as Aaron mentioned, in several places. So a lot of you that asked those questions, those would be having a further review as part of this process, but we'll probably get some information out there so you can actually see what they've been doing in actual practice when they're actually being used out there. Dwayne, I see you've got your hand up. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you so you can unmute yourself.
I just wanted to comment. I've had quite a bit of experience in driving through diverging diamonds in Missouri, and they work really well.
Well, concise and well said, sir. I think it's kind of like the same thing with the roundabouts, right? When you don't use them and you're not used to them, they're kind of scary. But I have to say the divergent diamond is actually a lot easier to navigate sometimes than people that aren't used to roundabouts. It's a different learning curve, but thank you so much for that comment. I also see here some other questions that relate to cost. This is probably a good time to kind of address that. Is divergent diamond a more expensive solution, Aaron, or is it actually more cost efficient? And also, which proposed plan of these 4, because we're kind of talking about all of these right now before we move into bike and ped, which one will have the highest volume or flow of vehicles to move through these intersections?
So that second question I can't quite answer yet, right? Because we're still in the analysis portion. So that's one of our, we call it performance measures, right? How much delay savings do we get? And that's something we're testing now. So that's a big criteria. And I want to point out before we get too excited about this DDI that it does have some drawbacks at this location. And one of the reasons we looked at it was because it is such a unique solution. It is very difficult to phase. So if it's expensive, it really needs to be done in one deal, in one shot. While it can provide a really good solution at the intersections, it really restricts what we can do on the interstate. As you can see here, we've got our 4 ramps. We got to get rid of one of the loops. We definitely can't put in another eastbound off exit loop ramp. That just doesn't work with this configuration, right? Those vehicles would be going in the wrong direction when they tie into Broadmoor Boulevard. So that's something important for us to consider, because as we look at all these alternatives one, or the categories of alternatives 1 through 3, those could all be part of the solution for this interchange, or the ones that don't compete with each other. So it's not that we're comparing this alternative against a loop ramp. That's not the comparison we're doing. We will be comparing this alternative versus a package of other alternatives at both ramp terminals that address the issues that we've been looking at in the purpose and need. So that's, I think, an important distinction, where this one is a little unique because it has so much impact at both those intersections. We really have to look at it as one alternative. The other locations, we can look at the pieces and see which ones work well and which ones don't, and come together with another solution. From a cost perspective, we're working on the cost estimates now, but I'm pretty confident in saying that this alternative is more expensive than any of the individual alternatives that we brought up before. Not necessarily all those grouped together, but as a standalone compared to other standalone projects, it's definitely going to be the most expensive.
So here's another question for you to address, which I think you were going to talk about anyway, but one of the other folks was asking about the issue of safety. And safety is also a performance measure. And I'm wondering, Erin, if you could just briefly address how that folds into the performance measures and what other things you're going to be looking at and then sending back out for public review.
Yeah, so as we're evaluating these alternatives, we're looking at traffic operations, right? Delay, queues, how many vehicles get backed up, and things like that. We're also focusing on safety measures, we look back at the past, where did we have crashes, and then we look ahead in the future and take information from other similar configurations to these alternatives and say, based off of what this looks like at similar places, here's our best guess of what this could do for crashes. Could it decrease crashes, increase crashes, things like that. We also have performance measures for safety that we're going to look at related to expected driver speed. So if there's a design that inherently slows drivers, we expect to see a safety benefit. Now, I'll point out too, and this is something that comes up with roundabouts, the benefit we typically see is in crash severity. I've seen crashes occur in roundabouts before, but I've never seen a bad crash happen in a roundabout because it's generally fender benders. That they do a good job of slowing people down. People still sometimes get confused, or if they're new to the area, haven't driven one before, they'll occasionally see fender benders. But that's an important measure. Speed reduction at an interchange like this can be really, really significant for safety benefits and reducing those injury and more significant car accidents.
Okay, so let's go ahead and go over to number 5, and then I'm going to go back to the rest of these overall questions. So alternative number 5 really relates to bicycle and pedestrian access. And so I think, if I'm not mistaken, this will be an enhancement to whichever one of these alternatives that we've been talking about comes out. Bike and Ultiped is certainly going to be a part of it. So I'm curious to open it up here before we again go to the rest of the questions. If anyone has any comments or concerns about this particular alternative and how it might play out separating bikes and pedestrians from Broadmoor traffic. Clearly that's a safety issue, but also an access issue because we do have so many neighborhoods in there. So does anyone have any questions or comments on that one? And if so, if you could raise your hand, we'll give you an opportunity to weigh in on this one. Teresa. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Yes, so I live off of Road 90 off of Sandifer, and when it's nicer out, I ride my bike to work. And so right now it's still doable. Some of the sidewalks aren't in place, even though I know we're not supposed to ride on the sidewalks, but up here on Sandifer and this area, we already have a huge volume of traffic. And as more houses are built, it's just going to get heavier. And then of course, crossing over Broadmoor, it's fairly bad. So, and then we have to hit Harris. And then I know there's construction that's supposed to be starting over there in the sand dunes, kind of around where the quarry is. My question is, are they going to, and they need to improve it. Is this going to be something that's going to happen with the bike lanes and everything? Will that be taken into consideration when they start this? Because there's a lot of people I see riding their bikes to work that go over, the river into Richland.
I'll take this one, if you don't mind, Aaron.
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Yes, to answer your question, bicycle and pedestrian facilities are being planned for the developments in the Broadmoor area. As a matter of fact, we're making it very clear to all the developments that it's critical that we have a much more connected bicycle and pedestrian network within the Broadmoor developments. And that's why getting this crossing across 182 is going to be important, because we see a lot of people possibly crossing here on bicycles or just walking over to the new developments. And so, yes, that is being considered.
Okay, yeah, because Delta is there also. And every day I see those kids, walking across or riding their bikes across from the south side of the freeway.
Yes.
Okay.
Good question.
Thank you so much. Were there any other comments or questions on bicycle and pedestrian before I go back to the general questions? Okay, let's go ahead and what does the next slide look like? I think that's just our summary or more questions, right? Yeah, so first of all, here's a survey. I want to make sure you guys all see this. This is an opportunity for you to go online and share comments, questions, concerns. Oh, Merrick, I'm sorry, let me get you right in there before I do that. Merrick Lee, if you want to go ahead and unmute yourself and make your comment, that'd be great.
Oh, it's also in the Q&A that to please consider that bicycles and pedestrians who are required to share the same one lane to cross a bridge, whether that's Road 100 or Midland, it truly is the same as asking motor vehicles to share the same lane oncoming. That it's confusing and it's dangerous. Bicycles generally will avoid it, like the Blue Bridge, when there's one option and oncoming traffic.
Hey, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's a really important point. So we appreciate your comment on that. Are there any others before I go to the other comments here? So let's go ahead and put up the survey, and I'm just going to go through these in the order received. I think some of them we've already answered, but we'll just go right in order and then come back down again. So one question was, is there a possibility to have an option for the I-182 westbound off-ramp to have another road exit connection at Bedford or Midland for the people trying to get to Sandifer and avoid Road 100 and the new development?
I think we already touched on that with really the same issues with connecting directly to Chapel Hill. That the access conflict with FHWA would be difficult, and the environmental impacts and right-of-way impacts are more significant.
So here's another one. Why isn't adding an additional north side off-ramp opposite of the newly proposed south side? Ken, are you still with us? Can you raise your hand so I can find you, and then you can ask that question live? I want to make sure that we understand it correctly. He may have left the building. We'll reach out to him separately. Another question was, is a similar arrangement to Queensgate feasible compared?
Oh,
Yeah.
hold on a second, Kendall. I think I got that. I think I understand that one. I think Ken was asking, we talk about interchange quadrants. He's talking about the northwest corner, I believe. Are we considering putting a loop ramp in there, which would be intended to serve, let me get this straight, it would be for the, to break up your westbound exit ramp, so the people who want to go north on Broadmoor would continue to go to the existing ramp, and then the people who want to go south on Broadmoor would use the new loop ramp. The reason we didn't consider that alternative was in our analysis of kind of the future no project condition, we weren't seeing a significant issue with that left turn movement, the westbound left turn movement at that intersection. And to do that design, we'd actually end up with a short weave section under the bridge, which from a safety perspective is not something ideal. So based on what we were seeing as the future needs, that alternative, while it could potentially fit into this interchange, we didn't see it as a significant benefit at this time.
Okay. We've got two. Go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say, Aaron, doesn't it also conflict with the westbound on-ramp?
You could, like I said, you could do a weave in there, right? You could tie
Okay.
into
Gotcha.
the existing, it would become we call it a collector distributor type system in there. So it would be like a step toward the full clover leaf. So you think about 395 and US 12 on the other side of town, it would start to look like that interchange.
Gotcha. Thank you.
There's a map.
If you would be so kind, Veronica, to go to that next slide that has the survey. I want people to make sure they can see that as much. We have two folks that are asking questions that are specific to roundabouts, and the questions really relate to are they friendly or not to big rigs and ag trucks that are moving through, and perhaps you could talk about design and how they would accommodate those trucks.
Yeah, so at this level, right, we're still not into the details of the design, but as Steve mentioned, we're not planning to close Broadmoor to the trucks that need to use it. So in general, with a roundabout, to serve bigger trucks, you make the roundabout bigger, right? The wider that circle is, the easier it is for the trucks. And then you also adjust your truck. We call it the truck apron. It's that center portion of the roundabout where you see generally the different colored pavement. Usually it's like pink colored. That's the area for trucks when they're making the turn, they can roll over that area. And I've seen, I believe, some roundabouts in near like Scott Avenue area in Woodland, where they have a lot of trucks using the freeway exit ramp, and there's some really big truck roundabouts. And I saw some trucks driving those, and it was working pretty effective. They have nice flat curves for them to roll over on those aprons. So the roundabouts would be designed to accommodate whatever truck uses this corridor.
And that would also, I assume, extend to emergency vehicles.
Yes.
Yeah, generally you should be able to keep your emergency vehicle in the travel lanes.
Yeah. Okay. Another question is related to when we do see, I'm going to turn off my camera because I'm a little bit unstable. I'm not actually unstable, just my feed is unstable. I'm very stable, sort of. When traffic is crossing over, we're talking about all these loops and everything else. Are they doing those at different elevations? Maybe you can explain, help people visualize how that would happen.
Is this which alternative is this pertaining to?
I think it's going to be pretty much at any of them. Kristen's like, when traffic crosses each other, are they over and under at different elevations?
So for the loop ramp option, that crossover, vehicles will be, as you go under Broadmoor Boulevard, you'll be basically level with the current freeway. So that would be, you'd be basically right next to the freeway. So that's the grade separation on that alternative. For the DDI option, everything you're seeing on the surface at Broadmoor, those roundabouts, those two directions of travel across the freeway, that's all the same elevation it is today, and then the ramps just slope down. For the bicycle and pedestrian structures, the ones we're looking at that are near the Broadmoor interchange, those would be at the same elevation as the current bridge over the freeway. So those would be basically the same level as that one. For all the pedestrian over and under crossings, they would have to meet whatever the standards are. So for an undercrossing, it would have to be, I don't remember off the top of my head what the head clearance is, plus the clearance for structure above you. So they'd either have to drop down about 10 to 12 feet, or they'd have to go up roughly, I believe it's at least 17 feet of clearance, might even be a little bit more than that to get over the ramp.
I see Kristen Anderson has her hand up, so I'm gonna let her ask her question. Kristen, you'll be able to unmute yourself now so you can ask your question or make a comment.
Yeah, I guess this is her husband, Steve. Yeah, I appreciate, I'm not familiar with that configuration roundabouts, but you say there's one in Lacey, or I'll try to get over there and take a look at it. But where they interchange on the number 4 graphic, where it shows our most complicated DDI. So the one previous to this one, where the traffic crosses at each section. So who's got the right of the way? I understand how roundabouts work, but there's still going to be a stop, and I have to wait for you, and you need to wait for me as they're backed up across the bridge.
One more forward, Veronica, to number 4.
Yeah, and actually, if we could go to the animation slides of that one where we show the route through, I can maybe talk to it a little easier. All right, so let's look at let's look at southbound. Let's look at the southbound approach. So the conflict point that Steve's talking about, I believe, is as you're coming southbound, you enter the roundabout. You can make a southbound right turn, or you can continue through the roundabout, and that's if you're going through. So the conflict point is with the vehicles coming northbound on the left side of Broadmoor Boulevard. Those vehicles would yield to you at that point. Once you're in a roundabout, you have the right of way. That's how a roundabout works, right? You always, as soon as you're in the roundabout, you have the right of way. So as a vehicle going southbound on Broadmoor, you would have the right of way. The northbound vehicles would be the ones that would have to yield to you at that point. And then as you get to the south, you will be yielding to vehicles that are heading northbound. So it's kind of a trade-off. You get to go free once, and then you have to yield. And that's really the case, I think, for any movement from any direction. You're going to have a location where you have the right of way, and then you have the location where you're the free move.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that
kind of answer your question.
Yeah, it does. I just haven't seen it before, so I was a little bit confused, but I appreciate that. I think the main thrust of this intersection has to be getting traffic off into that south loop, so adding another loop. But another loop exiting to the east is definitely needed. Thanks.
Hey, thank you for attending. I see a hand up from Maria Sandoval. Maria, I'm unmuting you, so you have the ability to unmute yourself and share your comment or question.
Okay, on that same graphic, and thank you for your time tonight. On that same graphic, so the same question regarding who's going to have right of way when the people are, let's say on the southbound, for example, and you're going to go east, and you have somebody coming in from the north going east, who's going to have right of way there? Or are there going to be 2 lanes to enter into the freeway?
First one in the loop.
That's a good question. That's a really good question.
Same thing with
and
the
that is
north.
actually something that, sorry, yeah, that's a good question. And I honestly can't answer that one yet until we complete the evaluation. That would be a case by case basis. We would determine where the volumes are higher And that would generally be the movement that would get the right of way. It doesn't have to be necessarily one movement or the other. We really get to decide that. We would probably do, one option is to do it as a 2-lane section and then merge it down to a single lane. So nobody has to yield. It's more of a merge. But the other is to have one approach yield and the other approach go free. And that would generally be the approach we do if there's one volume that's a lot higher than the other, right? So if there's one traffic volume that's significantly higher than the other, we would give that movement the right of way.
Yeah, but right now it might be
part
the
of the
people in
design.
the, yeah, right now I'm kind of thinking that the people from the south side would be at higher volume because there's more houses already built. But we know that in the future, you're going to have more houses built on that north side. So you're going to have a congestion built up. How would that be addressed for the future? You know
That's
what I mean?
something that's something in the design that you could make flexible. You could design both those approaches with the right curvature that they could either be free or yield, and you just put the yield sign on the one that's appropriate.
Okay.
So I just want to reiterate that, you know, we're
Good design
still,
question.
yeah, we're still in sort of a design, figuring all this out. And I wonder, because there's a couple other questions that relate to timing. Veronica, can you pull up the overall project schedule again? And I think these questions relate to the timing of when these particular improvements might actually be built. And I think that that's a little ahead of our game here right now, because again, we're still looking at the alternatives. They're going to figure out what the different other things. And Erin, perhaps you can address that and kind of why that's going to take a little bit longer in order to determine what the actual build is going to be.
Yeah, and sorry, Kendall, you cut out for like a critical about 5 seconds there.
No, what I was saying is,
restating that.
no, I think we're all kind of doing that. I'll de-camera again. The question is, a lot of folks want to know, basically, okay, we've got this great plan. When does it get built? And as we're talking about these alternatives, there's still analysis to be done on, you know, what's in safety, affordability, all these other things. So I know we see this on the screen right now, but what does that mean for the public in terms of their understanding about what we're going out to bid, let's say in the fall of 2022, great, when does it actually break ground?
Right. Well, so an important part of all this process, and it's not really, it's a performance criteria, but it's not the only, it's the only driver. But scalability is very important because there's a level of feasibility and what can actually be built in this timeline we're looking at right now. So that's going to be something that's taken into consideration when we're scoring these alternatives. And what could be a likely outcome is we have a preferred alternative. It could be a solution that has a lot of different pieces. Based on our analysis, we will be able to prioritize those, focus on the pieces that address the problems that are out there right now, and some of those, particularly the safety issues, and also some of the traffic issues that we're seeing out there. And then some of the alternatives that don't conflict, those could become a part of future phases of the project. So ultimately, what gets built, I mean, it depends on what we come up with as a preferred alternative, but Steve, I don't know if you want to add to this, and from the city's perspective, we definitely are considering cost, and it is going to determine the timeline.
Yes, the idea here is to take into account all of those issues as each of these alternatives are evaluated. One of the things that we have to keep in mind is we have a current need out there right now on I-182. And with the developments that are being proposed over in the Broadmoor area, the existing condition is going to get worse. So one of the areas that we are looking at with each of these alternatives is how long will it take for us to address some of the current needs? And so that will be a criteria that gets evaluated. We want to make sure we can address the issues that we're facing right now. We want to look at forward compatibility on projects related to what improvements can be done in the future. And so all of that is part of the evaluation process that goes into the next step, which is the second screening process that Erin referred to previously. tonight we're looking at comments from all of you to determine which one of these do you like, do you not like? If we change some, what would we change? And those comments are going to go into the analysis along with all those other things that we've talked about tonight.
Thank you so much. One of the other questions that kind of came up in general, how will this improve the traffic problem on Chapel Hill? The morning traffic prior to the interchange, will there be an extra lane to flow through to Broadmoor?
Well, yeah, good question. That issue will be solved by a separate project on Broadmoor Boulevard. The issues we're trying to fix here are strictly contained to the interchange. The solution for that issue has already, Steve, I don't know if you want to add to that, but there's already been some refinement and determination of what that needs to be. So
that is correct, Aaron. There are other projects that are being looked at right now along the entire Broadmoor and Road 100 corridor on both sides of the interchange. But this particular project, because it's related to an interchange that FHWA and WashDOT have jurisdiction over, we're focused on this project for now for tonight's meeting. We will likely have other meetings on the other projects that are going to be proposed for the Broadmoor and Road 100 improvements.
So a couple other questions here. One is for long-term planning, even though additional on and off ramps don't seem to be an option, have bridges over the interstate, such as at Road 90, been considered as an option for people to cross the interstate without having to congest the current two options?
good question. Yeah, so we've definitely considered, well, honestly, for all our analysis, we are considering, at least in the longer term, that the Road 76 overcrossing is in place, which is, I know, a bit farther to the east, but that overcrossing does pull traffic both from Broadmoor Boulevard and from Road 68. And that's a good opportunity to get some of those local trips away from it. What we've seen in general with the counts and our forecasting and everything else at this interchange is during the peak hours, and I know there are people on this call who will tell me that this isn't necessarily the case, because I'm sure you do this, but the through movements in the interchange are not nearly as heavy as the movements to and from the ramps. The amount of people who are actually trying to just drive through the interchange is not as high. Now, that being said, there's reasons for that, probably more avoidance than anything. People don't want to go through there because there's a lot of traffic. So I think the city is going to continue to explore other opportunities for further crossings of the interstate. Those types of projects are generally very supported by WashDOT and FHWA, and finding those optimal locations with the minimal environmental impact is part of it. They're also not cheap projects, so that's something that has to happen over time. But those are definitely pieces of kind of bigger picture system solutions. But for this specific project, we're really focused just to this interchange, making this interchange work. Did you add to that, Steve?
Yeah, I would just add that the city several years ago did a study of this area on I-182 between Road 68, actually all the way from 395 all the way to Broadmoor. And that analysis identified the Road 76 overpass as an alternative that would greatly improve or reduce the congestion. And the work that Aaron and his team is doing here on this interchange project has validated that even further with the modeling that they've done, and shows that yes, that Road 76 overpass is important to help reduce congestion at both the Road 68 and Road 100 interchanges. So the city is going to be considering that as another alternative, but that's going to be beyond this particular interchange improvement project. So we are considering it. We're looking at how we might be able to fund some planning level work on it, some design work, and some construction.
Veronica, can you go to the
Yep.
survey again for me, please? Go ahead, Aaron. Oh, Well, let me just do a couple things here. First of all, for those of you that are asking questions about the way that a divergent diamond will work, that's one of the things the project team will be looking at. So they'll be looking at everything from the impacts to the cost to all that. So all these questions that you have, we're capturing all of those. We don't have the answers for those tonight, but they will be examined as we move forward. And I think the other question that we noted here was, is the separation between projects of concern? And the answer is yes. Obviously, you have to look and see how one improvement affects another. And I think that's one of the things that Aaron was talking about. We're going to be looking at this holistically, right? To figure out what is the best combinations of investments once the research has been done, to figure out how we can maximize what we call the cost benefit, the overall cost of the project, and then the benefit to the community. And before that decision is made, I'm sure we're coming back out to you again to show you those and to have an opportunity for you to weigh in on that. And then the other question here that came up was really about this survey. So this survey gives you another opportunity to basically give us your ideas, your preferences, which ones you like better than others, or if you don't, anyway, whatever way you want to do it. And then we encourage you to share this information with other folks that are out there that maybe perhaps weren't able to make the meeting tonight. The idea here is we want to have as much input as possible. And, as Veronica mentioned earlier, we've had over 80 comments on this. We've had a lot of great attendance at the meetings, but we're still looking at all those other things. I'm saying here, it seems like a holistic approach would evaluate the surrounding concerns at the same time. And yes, there's a number of things that we look at in terms of the impacts on a particular project. And it's not just cost, it has to do with safety, feasibility, impacts, and then of course, different users, as we've heard people talk tonight about trucks versus bicyclists versus pedestrians, and making sure that there's ample things for all that. Maria, I see I don't think it's Maria though, I think it's your husband. I'm not sure, I can't remember. Forgive me if I've got that wrong, but I'll unmute you again so that you have an opportunity to make another comment.
Yeah, one of the things as you're talking about looking at this and how it's going to impact other developments or plans. I think to me, it's important that there kind of be like a consistent type of format that is being used on these interchanges, because, just to avoid confusion with the people that come to the area or that people that live in the area. That's just my opinion. You don't want to have like a mismatch of ways to drive in the area, is right. My thought.
No, and it's a really good one, especially when you see people that are visiting in an area. I think we've all seen that, people that aren't familiar with it. If you've never been on a roundabout, there's an education thing that's required with that. It's all kind of part of the process. And if this does move forward, I'm not saying it will, but if it did move forward with either roundabouts or diverging diamonds, there's a piece that goes along with that is education for people that will be using those roads and be able to access those safely. Can you go to the next slide there, Veronica? So as we were mentioning, again, we're in a process here where we're going to be moving forward. We're making great progress, but we're really going to be looking at other types of alternatives that would be brought back out for your review in the springtime. And then that also requires the NEPA, which is federal review environmentally, of those preferred alternatives and the design. Once the design comes out, then we're able to actually come back out to you in the general public for another look-see. And then once we have all that input in place, that allows the city to then go out to bid on whichever of the combinations of these things we're allowed to move forward. Go to the next slide for me. In the meantime, we're so appreciative of your time tonight. I know that many of you have opted to miss State of the Union, which I hope you recorded. I know I did. But anyway, we're really looking we're looking forward to working with you more on this. So again, if you have additional questions or comments, you can send those directly to Veronica Sullivan, who you met earlier tonight. Veronica will be taking those in, or directly to Aaron Berger. He's our project manager here at DKS. And Jody, I'm so sorry you found it difficult to locate. A mailer, what it's, I'm with you. Old school is actually, we see that a lot, and it's costly. And sometimes there isn't enough money to do that. I will say that the traffic we've seen has been good. But I think if you could help us out by sharing this information with folks within your community. And I don't know, Steve, I don't want to put you on the spot entirely on that, but we've been using the city's website. We've got a project website. It's been mentioned at a number of other meetings. And I know there's a lot of things that have gone on with this. And I guarantee you, no matter what you do, you're going to find at the end of the day that we weren't able to get everybody. But we're grateful for all of you that have spent time with us tonight. And Steve, did you want to mention?
Yeah, I think I would just add that this presentation tonight is being recorded. So if other people had a difficult time trying to find it, you can point them to the project website and you'll find a recording of this meeting and gather a lot of information from there as well.
And I think too, from our perspective, we'll make sure that there's information up there about Diverging Diamond, about roundabouts and whatnot, but we really do encourage you to contact us directly if there are any other questions that you might have or comments. We'll be continuing the public outreach throughout the spring and the summer. So this is an ongoing project where we're getting information together. Veronica, is that the last slide? I think it is. I'm not sure.
Kendall,
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Huh?
Yes, it's the last slide.
Okay, so then I'm going to defer over to Steve to wrap us up tonight. I just want to say again to everyone that we really appreciated your time this evening. We know your time is valuable and your input is really instrumental in making sure that we come up with a really good project at the end. So Steve, I will toss it to you, sir, to close this up.
Thank you, Kendall. And I just want to repeat the same thing. I appreciate everybody coming tonight. If you had difficulty finding it, you can always find information on this project at the City of Pasco's website. We have a link on that website to the project website. So if you go to the city's website, you can search Broadmoor Interchange and it should bring up the information you need to the project website. Again, thank you. If you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to Veronica, Aaron, myself, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have. And again, thank you. Have a wonderful evening, and that's
Thank
it.
you all. Okay, everybody,
night,
have a
everyone.
great rest of your week. And again, happy March. Can't believe it's March. How did that happen? Oh, well. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, everybody.